a vast technical center, screens flashing a violent, rhythmic red. A female CEO stands in the middle of the command center, her voice trembling with tension. The elite engineering team surrounds the core system, completely helpless. The contract deadline is ticking away. Only minutes remain. Losing the system means losing the entire corporation tonight. In the corner, a single dad in a worn maintenance uniform stands silently. No one calls his name. No one notices his presence. He leans down, listening to a faint, rhythmic vibration. He touches a single tiny component. The screens flip to green instantly, and power shifts forever. The man's name is Julian Park. He is 41 years old, a single father with quiet eyes that have seen far too much of the world's machinery. At this very moment, Julian isn't thinking about the billion-dollar crisis unfolding around him. He is looking at his watch. 3:15 p.m. His daughter Mia, who is 8 years old and possesses a smile that can light up the darkest room, is waiting at the school gate. He promised her they would get ice cream today. He promised he wouldn't be late. Julian works as a contract maintenance man for Cross Technology, one of the largest conglomerates in the city. To the high-paid executives, he is a shadow in a navy blue jumpsuit. His daily duties are mundane, fixing jammed doors, replacing burnt-out light bulbs, and ensuring the secondary cooling systems hum quietly. He is strictly forbidden from touching the core, the massive, pulsing heart of the company's global server network. He is the man who mops the floors after the geniuses leave, the man who empties the trash bins filled with discarded energy drink cans and crumpled diagrams of world-changing algorithms. But the world doesn't know Julian's secret. A decade ago, Julian Park was the industry's golden ghost. He was the lead system architect for the very foundations of modern data processing. He didn't just build systems, he breathed life into them. He was the wunderkind of the tech world, a man whose presence at a board meeting could swing a company's valuation by hundreds of millions. However, when a family tragedy took his wife and left him with a newborn daughter, the high-pressure world of Silicon Valley became a prison. He looked at the lines of code and saw the hours he was stealing from his child. He didn't want stock options. He wanted to hold his daughter's hand. He didn't want a corner office. He wanted a home. So he vanished. He deleted his digital footprint and took a job that allowed him to be invisible, choosing a life of low stress so he could be the father Mia deserved. Standing in the center of the chaos today is Helena Cross, the 40-year-old CEO of the empire. Helena is a woman of steel, dressed in a sharp gray power suit that fits her like armor. She is famous for her decisiveness and her absolute intolerance for failure. Today is the most important day of her career, the finalization of a massive merger that will redefine the global tech landscape. But an hour ago, the core crashed. The failure was sudden. There were no logs, no warnings, just a total, catastrophic blackout of data. The heartbeat of Cross Technology simply stopped. Helena has summoned every elite engineer in the building. They are graduates of the finest universities, men and women who charge $1,000 an hour for their expertise. They are currently frantic, their faces pale under the flickering red emergency lights. The air in the room is thick with the smell of ozone and expensive coffee gone cold. Julian stands near the back of the room, holding a toolbox he was using to repair a ventilation fan. He watches the scene with a detached, clinical interest. He sees the panic in their eyes and knows they are looking in all the wrong places. They are looking at the screens, but the answer is in the silence between the hums. One of the senior engineers, a man named Marcus, snaps at him. Marcus is the type of man who measures his worth by the brand of his watch. "You, maintenance, stay out of the perimeter. We don't need a janitor tripping over the fiber optics while we're trying to save this company. Get to the hallway now. Do you even know how much one of these cables costs?" "More than your house, probably." Julian nods respectfully, his expression unreadable. "Of course, my apologies. I was just finishing the fan." He begins to pack his tools, but he doesn't leave. He can't. He hears it. Amidst the shouting of the engineers and the frantic typing on keyboards, Julian hears a sound. It's a very specific, high-frequency whine, a dissonant note in a perfect mechanical orchestra. It's coming from the base of the primary server rack. It's a sound he recognizes from a prototype he designed 15 years ago. A sound that has nothing to do with code and everything to do with the physical soul of the machine. It's a cry for help that only he can hear. Helena is on the phone with the board of directors, her voice a sharp blade that silences the room whenever she speaks. I don't care if it's impossible. Fix it. We have 20 minutes before the contract expires. If that clock hits 0, the investors pull out and we are bankrupt by morning. She hangs up and looks at her team. The silence that follows is the sound of total defeat. The giants of tech are standing in a graveyard of their own making. The software team is in a frenzy. They have scoured millions of lines of source code in the last 30 minutes, looking for a logic error, a memory leak, or a hidden virus. The code is clean, the lead programmer shouts, his voice cracking with exhaustion. We've rolled back the last 3 updates. We've bypassed the security firewalls. There is no logical reason for the system to be unresponsive. It has to be a hardware failure. The processors must have fried. The hardware team immediately counters, their voices rising in defensive anger. They have already replaced every primary module, every power supply, and every cooling fan in the central rack. We've swapped everything, the hardware lead yells back. The diagnostic lights on the boards are green, the voltage is steady, but the system still won't boot. It's not hardware. It's a ghost in the software. It's a logic loop we can't see. The countdown timer on the wall is glowing a harsh, unforgiving red. 15 minutes remaining. The numbers blink with a rhythmic cruelty. Helena Cross walks to the center of the floor, her heels clicking like a funeral march on the raised metal floorboards. She looks at the faces of her hand-picked experts, the people she trusted with her legacy. Is this it? She asks, her voice dropping to a terrifyingly calm whisper that carries to every corner of the room. I pay you millions to be the best. I gave you every resource, every luxury, every piece of equipment you asked for. And now, at the most critical moment in this company's history, you are telling me you have nothing? That the impossible has happened? The room falls into a heavy, suffocating silence. The elite engineers look at their shoes, unable to meet her gaze. Their expensive degrees and years of experience have brought them to a dead end. They are pilots who have forgotten how to fly when the autopilot breaks. Julian Park takes a slow step forward. He knows he is breaking protocol. He knows he is risking his invisible life, the peace he worked so hard to build. But he thinks of the thousands of employees, the secretaries, the warehouse workers, the other maintenance staff, who will lose their jobs if this company collapses. He thinks of the machine he once loved, a machine that is currently being choked by its own guardians. Excuse me, Julian says. The sound is modest, but in the silence, it rings out like a bell. The engineers turn around, their faces a mix of confusion and irritation. Marcus, the engineer who told him to leave earlier, sneers. Are you still here? I told you to get out. This isn't a broken light bulb or a leaky faucet maintenance. This is a synchronized neural network. You wouldn't understand the first thing about it. Julian doesn't look at Marcus. He doesn't have time for small men with big egos. He keeps his gaze fixed on Helena Cross. He sees the desperation in her eyes, the raw fear of a leader watching her world burn. The diagnostic software is coming up clean because the error isn't digital, Julian says, his voice steady and resonant, carrying an authority that makes the engineers hesitate. You're looking for a ghost in the air, but the problem is in the earth. You're trying to fix a heartbeat with a dictionary. Helena narrows her eyes, her analytical mind momentarily overriding her anger. What are you talking about, Julian? Explain yourself. I can hear it, Julian says simply. He walks toward the central core rack, his steps deliberate. The guards move to stop him, but Helena raises a hand, silencing them. Julian doesn't look at a screen. He doesn't open a laptop. He kneels down on the floor, ignoring the dirt on his jumpsuit, and presses his ear against the cold metal casing of the server housing. He places his hand on the frame, feeling the micro vibrations that shouldn't be there. It's a resonant misalignment, Julian explains. His eyes closed as he visualizes the internal structure. The secondary cooling pump is vibrating at a frequency that's interfering with the magnetic alignment of the storage platters. It's a physical harmonic. The software thinks the hardware is dead because it can't read the data, and the hardware thinks the software is corrupted because the feedback is distorted. They're stuck in a physical feedback loop. No amount of coding or module swapping will fix a vibration. You're trying to reboot a car while the engine is shaking itself apart. The lead engineer, Marcus, laughs, a sharp, nervous sound that reeks of insecurity. Vibration? That rack is mounted on industrial-grade shock absorbers designed for seismic zones. That's physically impossible. He's a janitor, Helena. He's reciting science fiction because he wants to be a hero for 5 minutes. He's wasting our last 10 minutes. Helena looks at Julian. She sees a man who isn't sweating, a man who isn't guessing. She sees a level of calm that only comes from absolute, undisputed mastery. She looks at the clock. 9 minutes. The future of her company rests on a coin flip. Step aside, Helena commands her engineers. But Ms. Cross, this is a violation of every safety protocol. Marcus begins, his face turning red. I said step aside, she roars, her voice echoing off the glass walls. She turns to Julian, her eyes searching his. You have 60 seconds. If you're wrong, you'll never work in this city again, and I will personally see to it that you are held liable for interference. If you're right, well, just fix it. If you believe that sometimes the most overlooked person holds the most important key, subscribe now so you don't miss the moment everything is about to flip. The countdown clock reads 8:45. The air in the room is thick enough to choke on. Every eye is on the man in the navy blue jumpsuit. Julian Park doesn't reach for a diagnostic tool. He doesn't ask for a password. He doesn't even look at the complex monitors that the engineers are so obsessed with. He reaches into the side pocket of his faded jumpsuit and pulls out a single, small adjustment wrench, a tool with a worn wooden handle that he has owned for 20 years. He ignores the whispering of the engineers behind him. He ignores the CEO standing over his shoulder like a vengeful ghost. He focuses entirely on the machine. To Julian, the core isn't a collection of data or a symbol of wealth. It's a symphony of physics. And right now, one instrument is playing a note so sharp, it's shattering the rest of the orchestra. With surgical precision, he removes a small access panel at the very base of the rack. His movements are fluid, practiced, a stark contrast to the frantic fumbling of the experts earlier. He doesn't look at what he's doing. He feels it. His fingers find a specific tension bolt on the cooling assembly, hidden behind a layer of high-tech insulation. This was a design flaw Julian had warned his superiors about a decade ago. A flaw they had dismissed as too theoretical and not cost-effective to fix. He gives the bolt a quarter turn, a tiny microscopic adjustment. To the casual observer, he did nothing. To the machine, he just saved its life. The high-frequency whine he had heard earlier suddenly changes pitch. It drops into a lower, smoother hum. The erratic vibration against his palm vanishes, replaced by a steady, healthy thrum. Julian closes his eyes for a second, enjoying the harmony. Now, Julian says softly, his voice barely a whisper in the silent room. Reboot the primary bridge. Not the whole system, just the bridge. One of the junior engineers, acting on instinct and ignored by the paralyzed senior staff, hits the sequence on a nearby terminal. For 5 agonizing seconds, the room is dead silent. The giant wall monitors remain dark. Marcus smirks, his hand already reaching for his phone to call security. He's ready to enjoy Julian's failure. But then, a soft, melodic chime echoes through the high-fidelity speakers of the command center. The massive wall monitors flicker to life. The angry red critical failure banners vanish like smoke in the wind. In their place, a single calm line of white text appears on a deep blue background. System stable. All sectors online. One by one, the indicators on the console turn a vibrant, steady green. The data throughput begins to climb. 10%, 50%, 90%, 100%. The merger synchronization, which had been frozen for hours, completes in a burst of processing speed. The contract is saved. The clock stops at 7:12. The room erupts into a stunned, breathless silence. No one cheers. No one moves. They're all staring at the man in the blue jumpsuit who is currently standing up, closing his access panel, and wiping a small smudge of grease off his wrench with a rag. He looks like a man who just finished fixing a lawnmower, not a global financial engine. Helena Cross stands frozen. She looks at the screens, seeing her empire restored, her legacy secured. Then she looks at Julian. She realizes that in 60 seconds, this maintenance man did what $100 million worth of experts couldn't do in 5 hours. She sees the grease on his hands and realizes that true genius doesn't always wear a tie. She sees the way the engineers are looking at him. It's no longer a look of contempt or mockery. It's a look of pure, unadulterated awe mixed with a deep, burning shame. The hierarchy of the room has been annihilated. The man at the bottom is now the only person in the room who truly matters. Julian looks at the clock on the wall. 3:35 p.m. Panic finally flashes across his face for the first time today. "I have to go," Julian says, picking up his toolbox and snapping it shut. "Go," Helena repeats, her voice finally coming back to her, breathless and confused. "You just saved a multi-billion-dollar corporation. You just pulled us back from the edge of a cliff. You're not going anywhere. We need to talk. We need to—" "I have to pick up my daughter," Julian says, his voice firm and unwavering. "I promised her ice cream. I'm already 5 minutes late, and I don't break my promises to her. Not for this. Not for anything." He begins to walk toward the exit. The elite engineers part for him like the Red Sea. They don't block his path. They don't even breathe. They simply watch as the most powerful man they've ever met, a man who carries the keys to their kingdom in a toolbox, walks out of the room to go buy a $4 ice cream cone. Helena Cross doesn't let the mystery rest. While the junior engineers are busy stabilizing the system and the senior engineers are trying to hide their embarrassment, she orders a deep-dive forensic audit of the hardware logs. "I want to know why that bolt was loose," she demands, her voice cold as a winter morning. "And I want to know exactly who Julian Park is. I want his records, his history, everything from the day he was born." 30 minutes later, the lead auditor approaches her in her private glass office. His hands are shaking so badly he almost drops the tablet he's holding. "Ms. Cross, you're not going to believe this. The vibration, it wasn't an accident. It wasn't wear and tear." Helena's eyes sharpen. "Go on." "The cooling pump was intentionally overclocked via a hidden firmware patch hidden inside a routine security update," the auditor explains. "It was designed to trigger that specific physical resonance only when the system was under maximum load, like during a merger synchronization. It was a time sabotage. It was meant to look like a random hardware failure." Helena's blood turns to ice. Sabotage from within. "Who authorized the update?" The auditor swallows hard, looking at the door to make sure no one is listening. "The authorization code came from the senior technical consultant's private terminal. Thomas Vance." Thomas Vance, Helena's closest advisor, her mentor, the man who had been with her since she started the company. Helena realizes the truth instantly. It was a coup. Thomas wanted the merger to fail so the company's stock would plummet. He had a group of investors ready to buy up the devalued shares, allowing him to take over the company as the savior who would rebuild it. "And there's something else," the auditor continues, his voice hushed. "We looked into Julian Park's records. He didn't just work around machines. We had to bypass 3 layers of encrypted government archives to find this. 10 years ago, he was the chief architect for Aegis Systems. He was the golden ghost. He literally designed the blueprints for the core technology we are using today. He is the father of this entire architecture." Helena looks at the records on the screen. She sees the patents. She sees the awards. She sees a photo of a younger Julian standing next to the president, receiving an award for technological innovation. She looks at the date he disappeared, the day his wife died. She looks at her own payroll records and sees that she had the greatest mind in the industry, cleaning her floors and fixing her vents for 3 years, while she paid a traitor millions to destroy her. The irony is a physical weight in her chest. She had been searching for visionaries in expensive boardrooms, while the man who built the world was standing in her shadow holding a mop. She immediately calls her security team. "Find Thomas Vance. He's likely headed for the private airfield. Intercept him. I don't care what force is required. And call the FBI. Tell them we have evidence of corporate espionage and attempted sabotage of national infrastructure. Thomas Vance is intercepted at the airport gate, his bags filled with encrypted drives and burner phones. He is handed over to federal authorities in front of the press he had invited to watch Helena's downfall. His contracts are terminated, and his name is erased from the building before the sun sets. Then Helena thinks of Julian. She thinks of the way he looked at his watch. She thinks of the way he spoke about the foundation. She realizes that she has been chasing status, while Julian has been holding on to value. She has been building a house of glass, while he was the only one who knew how to keep the foundation from cracking. She gets into her car, her heart pounding. Find out where Julian Park takes his daughter for ice cream, she tells her driver, and drive, fast. Julian is sitting at a small chipped plastic table in a public park near Mia's school. The sun is beginning to set, casting long golden shadows across the grass. Mia is happily devouring a large chocolate cone, her face smeared with joy, telling him a long, animated story about a drawing she made in class. Julian is listening with rapt attention, his eyes bright with a happiness that no amount of money could buy. He looks like a simple, content father, his grease-stained jumpsuit the only hint of the world he just saved. A sleek black sedan pulls up to the curb, its tinted windows reflecting the orange sky. Helena Cross steps out. She isn't wearing her power suit anymore. She has discarded the jacket, her sleeves are rolled up, and she looks human for the first time in years. She walks across the grass, her heels sinking into the soft earth. "Julian," she says softly as she approaches the table. Julian looks up, not with surprise, but with a calm recognition. He knew she would come. "Ms. Cross, I hope the system is still green. I checked the remote status on my way out. It looks stable." "It is," she says, sitting down in the tiny, precarious plastic chair opposite him. She looks at Mia, then back at Julian. "I found out about Thomas. He's in custody, and I found out about who you are. The Golden Ghost. Why, Julian? Why clean floors when you could own the building?" Julian looks at his daughter, who is now trying to share her ice cream with a stray ladybug. "Because buildings are heavy, Helena, and they're cold. I spent half my life building things that lived in boxes. I realized I wanted to build something that could smile back at me. Mia is my legacy. The core is just a machine." Helena feels a lump in her throat. She has spent her life building a legacy of steel and glass, only to realize it could be toppled by a single loose bolt. "I'm here to offer you the position of Chief Technology Officer. I'll give you a salary that matches your legendary status. I'll give you the power to rebuild this team, to fire everyone who looked down on you, to create anything you want." Julian looks at Mia. Mia looks back at Helena with wide, curious eyes. "Is she a queen, Daddy?" the little girl asks. Julian smiles. "In her world, yes." He looks back at Helena.